Halo Infinite's second technical test has come and gone, and with that I wanted to share all my thoughts and experiences from the flight this past weekend, although I am going to try and keep them a little bit more brief than last time we did this, just because we do have another test coming up this weekend with the BTB focus test, so that could sway some of my opinions on different things, but regardless I still wanted to get my opinion and share all my thoughts and everything about the arena focus test that we had this past weekend. So yeah, let's get started. Before we get into the video though, let me tell you about today's video sponsor, Hero Wars. Hero Wars is a fantasy online action RPG game with a variety of PvP and PvE modes. You can fight all sorts of powerful bosses and experience the cool story. The game currently has 6 available game modes with the Arena, Airship, Outland, Guild, Infinite Tower, and the Grand Arena. This gives you a lot of variety, and currently the game is played by over 100 million players across the world, and today exceeded over 4 million players, so there's plenty of people playing. Hero Wars can be found on Android and iOS, but it also works on your web browser if you'd prefer to play it there. Every week the game keeps things fresh with a variety of events and sales, which open up new opportunities and features in the game. So join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero, as well as 62 emeralds and 30,000 gold. Scan this QR code on screen or download the game from the link in the description below. And thanks again to Hero Wars. Before we get into the nitty gritty and everything of this video, I just want to give you guys my brief opinion on the flight if one, you don't want to watch the whole video, and also I want to put this at the start because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are kind of nitpicky or their specific experiences, and I want to make sure it's known that I didn't have an overall negative experience with this flight, even though I am going to talk about a lot of things that I think I'd like to see changed or things that I just plain didn't like. Regardless though, my opinion on the flight is that it still isn't perfect. Obviously there was still a lot of issues, but it does have me hopeful for Halo Infinite. I think the core that is there has the opportunity to be a very good Halo game, and I am really excited to play more of this game and get to try out BTB this upcoming weekend. They did have a bunch of issues with invites and everything this time around, because correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that everyone was going to get into this flight. However, that seemed to not be the case, but it is a flight. Things aren't really meant to be perfect, and so I'm not going to dwell on that too much, although it is a bummer if you thought you were going to get into this flight and you ended up not being able to play. However, I did see that everyone on Xbox will get to play next weekend regardless of if you were signed up ahead of time or not. However, they are still looking on solutions for PC players over on Steam, so keep an eye on that for next weekend. If you're on Xbox, you can play no matter what. You do still need to go sign up now though, so you can play, but other than that, if you're on PC and you didn't get into the last flight or you didn't sign up early enough for the last flight, keep an eye out to see if there's a way for you to get in this next weekend. Now that said, there were some general improvements for this flight over the one that we had a couple months ago, being performance definitely being a lot better this time around. Last time I would say I averaged about 80 to 90 frames on my 3080 Ti. This time I was probably in the 110 to 120 range playing on low graphics. Still not ideal. I want to be over 144 playing with the specs that I have, but definitely a big improvement over last time. The game also seemed to crash a little bit less. I still had some crashes throughout the weekend, but not nearly as many as I had last time. And then some more gameplay focused general improvements are they went with the more classic style of Halo radar this time around. I was a big fan of that change. I know some people weren't. They liked the more HCS focused radar that we had in the last flight, but I think this radar works a lot better for social settings, which I believe is what we're probably playing during these flights, and so I was happy to see the return of the classic style Halo radar. They also seem to improve the visibility of those outlines around the enemies, and I didn't have any issues spotting who was and who wasn't an enemy throughout my playtime this week. I honestly can't think of a single time in my mind where I had to do a double take or something like that to see if someone was an enemy, and in my opinion, if the system's working correctly, it's a system you're not going to think very much about, and throughout the weekend I very rarely thought about the friend or foe system, and so I think that's a good thing. Now let's move on to my thoughts about the sandbox, the balance, and everything that goes along with it. First off, in this flight we got to see the changes to the drop wall. I saw Green Skull did a video showcasing how much quicker it comes out, and it's like 0.2 seconds quicker than it was in the previous flight. I wouldn't have even noticed that if I hadn't have seen that video, so the drop wall still feels the same to me, pretty weak, and I think in my opinion probably needs to see a bit more changes to be a useful piece of equipment. Now that said, the grapple shot made its return in this flight and it's awesome. I love it. My only issue with the grapple shot, and this goes for the next equipment, the repulsor too, is sometimes I hold on to those charges because they're limited time, or if they were on a cooldown or I had more charges, I'd be more willing to try and make wacky and fun play plays with them, whereas right now, unless I have a for sure play or I'm specifically trying to do something, I usually hold on to them. One issue though that I currently have with the way equipment works is there's no sound cue for picking up dropped equipment. Say you kill someone who had a grapple shot and you run over that grapple shot, nothing tells you that you picked it up, it just goes into your inventory. And there were many times this weekend where I picked up repulsors or drop walls or grapple shots and I just straight up didn't notice that I had them until either way later on during my life, or I went to pick something else up and I noticed, oh hey, I have a grapple shot. And so I'd like them to maybe introduce a sound cue or even use the Spartan AI to say something like grapple shot picked up. Even though I don't necessarily love the AIs, I think this would be a good spot for them to give useful information. I don't know if other people have that issue, but I definitely ran over and picked up a ton of equipment and just straight up didn't notice. Speaking obviously of equipment, they introduced the repulsor, which is absolutely a ton of fun. Not only can you reverse things like grenades, you can also use it to do cool repulsor jumps. Honestly, that's more what I used it for than the reversal effect, and the repulsor as an equipment is a ton of fun. Then the grapple shot have so many opportunities to make cool plays, and I cannot wait to see how good people get using these equipment on the different maps. There's already a bunch of clips that came out over the past weekend of people making absolutely nutty plays with these two equipment pieces. They also have a cool kind of counteraction to each other where you can repulsor an enemy, but then someone can grapple shot to you, or vice versa. Someone could be grapple shotting to you and you repulse them away to keep them away from you. So it kind of has that cool interaction between those two pieces of equipment. Also in this fight, they changed the visibility of the overshield, and now instead of just being slightly brighter or whatever it was last fight where a lot of people complained you couldn't even tell when people had overshield, you are now a glowing white blob. Very visible, very obvious you have overshield, but honestly a little bit ugly. I guess if I'm being honest with you, I'll take knowing who has overshield and who doesn't over not knowing, even if it's a little bit ugly, but I have to imagine there's probably a better solution for how to convey who has overshield. Another issue that I became increasingly frustrated with over the weekend is, say you have any equipment, a drop wall, a grapple shot, and you go to pick up an overshield or an active camo, you actually get kind of stuck at that pickup station for a fair amount of seconds because you have to swap out your equipment. Say your drop wall, you have to swap it out for the overshield, then you have to activate the overshield and then pick your drop wall or whatever piece of equipment you had back up before you can then continue on traversing the map. I would love to see the ability here to maybe hold the pickup button instead of tap it, or tap it instead of hold it, and it would just automatically activate that overshield or that camo without having to drop the equipment you're already holding. I think that would make it a lot cleaner and you'd be able to move through those sections and pick those power-ups a lot more on the move than you currently can. Moving on, I want to talk a bit about the guns, and honestly, this is a portion of the video where I'm going to put a lot of opinions out and a lot of it's in flux because A, we haven't played BTB, and B, I think we're playing social settings, which is going to be a lot different than competitive settings, so take some of the things that I say with a grain of salt. However, that said, the assault rifle sidekick combination for the starting loadouts that we currently have just doesn't work in my opinion. The assault rifle is too strong, the effective range is probably farther than it should be for the assault rifle, it also melts people really well short range and mid range, especially with the ability to headshot people once they already have their shields depleted. And then the sidekick, while a good secondary weapon, doesn't necessarily fill the role of a precision starting weapon for me in my opinion, especially with the bloom that it has, effectively making it pretty weak at longer ranges. And so what I find with the AR sidekick spawn is you have two weapons, both having more mid to short range effectiveness, so I feel we really lack the utility of having something like a battle rifle off spawn that we've had in previous games, or even the Halo 5 Magnum, which while it didn't have the range of a battle rifle or a DMR per se, it still had a lot better effective range than the assault rifle or the sidekick in Halo Infinite. A ton of my games in Halo Infinite just came down to people running around with ARs, and so at times that felt really off-putting for me. I understand people want the assault rifle to be effective, but I also don't want to play entire games where everyone's just using the assault rifle and pickups and the few pickups they get off the map. One issue that I think plays into seeing the AR too much is actually the way that the battle rifle and the commando spawn. Currently they spawn in those weapon crates or those weapon drop stations on the wall, whatever those are called, and all the arena maps have two of those. And depending on the map and just RNG, sometimes you'll have one battle rifle, sometimes you'll have two battle rifles, sometimes you'll have two commandos, one of each, etc. But at max, you're going to have two precision weapons on the map, and I feel like in a lot of cases that just isn't enough. Especially, like I said, with those two starting weapons, the assault rifle and the sidekick, not really having that great of range. While the assault rifle is definitely very strong. If you run into a situation where the opposing team is controlling the battle rifle and the commando spawn, or the 2 battle rifle spawns, etc., you can get into a situation where it can be pretty hard to fight out of that. And I think that could be alleviated by obviously 1, having a proper precision weapon spawn, or B, maybe just having more BR and commando spawns across the map. In conjunction with this, I'm also not a fan of this rotating spawn stuff. If it's only a social setting, I'm okay with it, but I really hope this isn't something we see in competitive. I don't want there to be 4 or 5 different permutations of weapons on a map that just get randomly selected as you go into it. It feels awkward. I hate on live fire when one team has a commando and one team has a BR. I'm not a big fan of that, and I'd like to see it more streamlined, honestly in social, but especially for competitive with set spawns in those little weapon boxes. And that goes for the power weapons too, even on a map like Behemoth where there's the skewer spawn version or the sniper rifle spawn version. Moving on a bit, the gravity hammer felt a bit better in this flight, and it seems now to have a little bit of that gravitational effect that we're used to, but probably not to the same degree that it had in a Halo 3. The sniper rifle also felt honestly a good amount better this flight than it did in the past flight. However, if you've seen those clips floating around of the no scope having bloom, not a big fan of that. I don't think that's a great way to balance the sniper rifle. I think Halo sniper rifles should always be fully accurate when you're no scoping them, and it feels really awkward to actually have the sniper crosshair on someone and miss due to bloom. Bloom in general is just kind of an issue in Halo Infinite. The commando has a lot of bloom, although that's a lot easier to work around because it resets really fast, and you honestly shouldn't be full autoing the commando anyways, but the sidekick has a ton of bloom, making it, like I mentioned earlier, not very effective at longer ranges. And then like we just talked about, there's the bloom when you're no scoping a sniper rifle. Bloom in my opinion is just a bad FPS mechanic. I don't like it at all. It's really frustrating in the case of the sidekick where you can get into a sidekick versus sidekick fight, and in an ideal world you pace your shots so that all your shots are accurate and you don't get screwed over by bloom, but there's always going to be tons of scenarios where you're fighting someone, they just spam the sidekick at full speed, they get the RNG in their favor, they hit all their shots, and they absolutely destroy you even though you were properly pacing your shots. I don't like that that's even a scenario that's possible, and I hope that they maybe look into reducing the bloom or just removing it altogether from this game and rebalancing these guns in a different way. We also got to use another one of the power weapons a bit more this flight, and that was the skewer. To me, honestly, the skewer just feels like an anti-vehicle weapon, and I really don't think it should be spawning on live fire. And in my opinion, even when it spawns on Behemoth, I'd rather there just be sniper rifles there anyways. It is cool to skewer a vehicle, and it is pretty effective for that, but the travel time of the skewer makes it really hard to actually shoot people with it, especially on Behemoth where that map is pretty big. Next up, I don't like what they've done with the plasma pistol. So if you've heard, the plasma pistol no longer has the EMP effect on vehicles. I get the premise. Plasma weapons are supposed to do shield damage, electric weapons are supposed to have the EMP effect, and then you have your standard UNSC guns that do normal health damage and whatnot, and then you have the Promethean weapons that kind of have the incendiary effect. I get that, I understand that, and it is very clear to me why they've done that, but without the EMP effect, the plasma pistol just doesn't really feel like it has a place. It doesn't have very good tracking in arena, and it's hard to hit people with, and now no longer EMPs vehicles, and I really just don't see very many scenarios where I'm picking up the plasma pistol or even thinking about using the plasma pistol. Moving on, a weapon that did get introduced this flight that has the EMP effect was the shock rifle. I'm going to be honest with you, in all the games that I played at Behemoth, I didn't really get to see the shock rifle much, probably due to those rotating spawns that we have where you don't get the same weapon spawns every single game. The shock rifle seems cool. It's definitely like a weaker version of the sniper rifle against regular Spartans. Once you add in the fact that 2 shots to a vehicle EMPs it, I think it has cool utility, and it should probably have a place in the sandbox, especially in BTB or on regular arena maps that have vehicles. In general, I think one issue that I have kind of with the balance of the sandbox is it seems there are too many weapons that are quote-unquote utility weapons. You have the assault rifle that's very strong, you have the sidekick, which in my opinion is a little weak but still usable, and then you have the BR and the commando, which are both solid precision weapons. From there, you have your power weapons, the sniper, the rocket launcher, the skewer, which we talked about, not a big fan of, the ravager, which is actually pretty good, and then the gravity hammer, which works as a good melee weapon. But outside of that, a lot of the other weapons seem like they're more utility weapons. You got the plasma pistol, which honestly lost a lot of its utility. You have the shotguns, which in my opinion just aren't all that effective, and I'd rather just use the assault rifle most of the time, and that goes for both the heat wave and the bulldog. And then you have things like the plasma carbine, which again can be useful at times, but most of the time I feel like I'm better off just using the assault rifle. That's kind of less of the case for the Needler. The Needler currently is in a pretty good place, and they did improve the sound, so it sounds a little bit better this time around, but still, honestly, most scenarios I'm probably going to pick the assault rifle because the assault rifle is very strong at the moment. One thing to mention while talking about all the weapons and the sandbox in general is during the flight you were able to do a melee glitch, which if you played Halo 2 it was pretty familiar. A lot of people call it the BXB, where you can just spam melee and reload and punch people really fast. 343 already said they're aware of this and it's going to be patched out, and while don't get me wrong, it was a lot of fun and it was very satisfying to do, I do see how in this case in Halo Infinite it probably ruins the balance a bit because it was really easy to do. You could honestly just spam melee and reload. There was no timing to it, and although it was absolutely hilarious just to speed punch off someone's overshield when they had an overshield, that doesn't feel very good if you pick up the overshield, wrap a corner, and then instantly get punched a bunch of times in the face by someone BXBing and lose your entire overshield and die. Another thing to note before we move on to the next section is that next weekend is the big team battle section. Unisec actually came out today and said that we aren't going to have BR spawns in BTB. I'm willing to test it out, I'll wait and see, but I do not anticipate AR sidekick spawns working very well for big team battle. Moving to 12v12 and these bigger maps is going to really show how not effective the assault rifle and the sidekick are at longer ranges, and unless the maps are absolutely littered with battle rifles and commandos, there are going to be many cases where teams are going to be able to absolutely trap people off spawn with their precision weapons, while the people spawning are just trying to fight back with an assault rifle or a sidekick, which like I said isn't going to have nearly the effective range on those bigger maps. Obviously though, that's all speculation. We'll wait and see how that plays out next weekend. Next up, I want to talk about sprint in Halo Infinite. We already talked about this a lot last time, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. The only thing that I want to mention is that this weekend playing against real people, I don't think I'm a fan of the shields recharging when sprinting. Yes, the sprint speed is a lot slower in Halo Infinite than it was in Halo 5, but there are many maps like Live Fire where even with the slower sprint speed, it is still really easy to sprint away, get away from people, get your shields back, and then turn around and fight. Or if this was Halo 5 and you were sprinting to try and get away, your shields wouldn't regen, so if the person chasing after you was able to catch up, you'd still be weak and they'd probably be able to finish you off. Currently in Halo Infinite, if you can delay long enough, you can get your shields back and then turn that fight around pretty easily. I had that happen to me handfuls of times during the flight, and I did that to people a ton too. Next up, we can talk a little bit about the vehicles. I won't talk a ton about these because we're going to see a lot more of these next weekend with big team battle, but currently the Warthog just feels weird to drive. The crosshair on the turret is just odd, and it seems to have no punch when shooting, and the actual physics of driving the Warthog just seems off. It feels really light, and I just don't like the way it feels when driving. The Ghost, on the other hand, actually seems really strong, at least on Behemoth. One thing that I'm kind of worried about in general for the whole vehicle sandbox is grapplejacking, which while is a ton of fun to do, is pretty overpowered, and in my opinion nerfs the effectiveness of vehicles a ton, as just grapple shotting to someone instantly means you're going to be able to jack that vehicle. Whereas obviously in the past, if you wanted to jack a Banshee or a Warthog or a Ghost, you had to kind of jump on top of it right as it passed you. But now, especially in a map like Behemoth, where there's plenty of grapple shots to go around on the map, it's pretty easy to pick one up and use it to take over the Warthog or the Ghost. Like I said though, I'm very interested to see how these vehicles play out next weekend, so we'll kind of revisit this one a lot after the BTB playtest, I imagine. As a side note, I'm sure all of you saw there was a ton of weapons that weren't necessarily in the flight, but they were in the build. I imagine we're going to see some of these next weekend, so I'm talking about things like the Sentinel Beam, the Mangler, the thruster equipment, the disruptor pistol, and all that stuff. I didn't really get to use those very much, at least in proper PvP matches, other than my first match where I spawned in and Sentinel Beams and Manglers and the thruster were all spawning on the map. I only got to play with them that one match though, so I didn't really get to test them out too much. Still kind of hold my judgment on those weapons, but I did think it was funny that those spawned in for one game. I think that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on the weapons and the vehicles and kind of everything else in the sandbox, so we can now move on to the maps. My opinions of the maps didn't change too much with Live Fire and Recharge. I think Live Fire is still an okay layout for a map. It just looks boring and it's pretty bland in general and safe. I think it still fits that role pretty well. Recharge was a map that I enjoyed last flight, and honestly I still think it's an okay map. However, Bazaar was probably the map I would have pinpointed as my favorite before playing a bunch of PvP on it. However, after playing on it a ton. I found the middle of the map very awkward. You had people standing on both sides kind of taking pot shots across the map, mostly with assault rifles and sidekicks that didn't really have the range to get those kills effectively unless you were able to pick up that one commando or that one battle rifle that spawned on each side. Overall, I just found the gameplay on Bazaar kind of awkward, and the flow of the map didn't really seem all that great. And so out of the maps in the flight, I'd probably put Bazaar as my lowest on that list. The new map in this flight was Behemoth, and that's the 4v4 map with vehicles. Behemoth is honestly a ton of fun. I don't have much to say about it other than it was cool. The only thing to say is Behemoth is pretty big for a 4v4 map, which wasn't really a problem because you had repulsors and grapple shots and vehicles to traverse the map. However, you really noticed how ineffective things like the sidekick are across the map when you saw someone and you basically just couldn't do anything other than look at them unless you'd picked up an actual precision weapon. Definitely a good map though, and it is a map that feels very much like a Halo map. Alright, moving on to the next section of the video, we have game modes. In this flight, we were introduced to CTF and Strongholds. Overall, I don't really have a ton of thoughts on these game modes, as if we're being honest, both Capture the Flag and Strongholds are very solid Halo game modes. The only things I want to say are that Strongholds on recharge was a little bit weird as the A and C points were really close, and Capture the Flag I did actually have some issues with, although these are very fixable issues. Flag juggling felt terrible in CTF, so either I'd like to see it better, or maybe they're just trying to de-incentivize flag juggling altogether. In Halo Infinite, they did introduce the ability to sprint with the flag, so making it harder to juggle the flag might have been on purpose, and I actually don't mind being able to sprint with the flag because they introduced this cool system where if you walk normally with the flag, your position will not be revealed, but if you sprint with the flag, then it reveals your position to the enemy. I think that's a really cool trade-off, as you can kind of stealth pull the flag if you want and go a little bit slower, or you can sprint with the flag to try and pull it as fast as possible, but then obviously the enemy is going to know exactly where the flag is. One other issue with CTF, and you may or may not have saw the clips, is you can grapple shot the flag all the way across the map. That's broken. That needs to be fixed. It's really cool, and I liked seeing the clips, but if that happens in a competitive match or that happens to you, you're going to be pretty pissed off when someone does grapple shot, flings the flag across the entire map, and they instantly get a cap on you. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was sort of the match sweatiness of Halo Infinite's flight. I saw a ton of people saying that the matches that they were getting in PvP over this weekend were very, very sweaty and one-sided. I personally didn't experience this. I felt that my games were pretty casual. I had some games that were a little bit more difficult, and I definitely lost some games too. It's not like I was winning all my games, but overall I felt like I could kind of sit there, relax, shoot the shit with my friends, and play social Halo, which is ideally what I want when I'm trying to play social. However, if you felt that the matches were too sweaty, all I'm going to say to this is kind of just don't worry. You do have to realize that this flight was for people who not only follow Halo and stuff all over social media, but they also signed up before a specific date and all that. So these are going to be your more dedicated Halo fans, the Halo fans that have probably still been playing Halo to some degree over the years, whereas once Halo Infinite comes out, there's going to be all sorts of new people. There's going to be people that have never played Halo before. There's going to be people that haven't played Halo for 10 plus years, and so there's going to be a lot more wide of a spectrum in terms of player skill, and I think that will really help with the match sweatiness. And kind of the last topic that I wanted to talk about, and I saved this for last because I hate talking about this because people just kind of attack each other, is mouse and keyboard versus controller. I'm not going to tell you which one is better. All I'm going to say is that in Halo Infinite, the strafe speed is absolutely cracked, and that is very hard to track if you're playing on mouse and keyboard. Does that mean mouse and keyboard is bad and that controller is better? No, not necessarily. I just think maybe they could balance the strafe speed a little bit better. Maybe fix the animation so it doesn't seem like the character just wildly swings back and forth or something like that. But that was primarily my only issue I had trying to play this game on mouse and keyboard. Controller to me felt fine for the most part, although as many people have noted, aiming in general kind of just feels off in this game, and that goes for both input methods, both mouse and keyboard and controller. So hopefully that's something that 343 can figure out, because I don't really want to see another Halo 5 scenario where we just have heavy aim for the entire game's lifespan. And that's honestly pretty much going to do it for this video. I think I went over all the things that I wanted to talk about throughout this flight. I'm sure there's probably some that I forgot, even though I wrote out a big outline and everything like that. But yeah, let me know in the comments below how you felt about the flight. Like I said, I enjoyed the flight. I had a good time. I'm really excited for Halo Infinite. However, there are issues in this flight, and there are issues that need to be fixed before it launch. launch. Optimization needs to come for this game. You can't have a competitive shooter where top-end PCs can't even get 144 FPS. That just doesn't fly in this day and age, and so that's something they really have to make sure they get right. Other than that, like I said, I have issues with the general weapon sandbox and in a broader sense, but that is something that could be in flux even after launch, whereas something like performance I think needs to be fixed day one or the game could have issues. And I think that's pretty much going to do it for the video. If you like the video, you know what to do. Shout out to Hero Wars again for sponsoring the video. Follow me over on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram. I really don't know where I'm going to be streaming. I'm kind of torn between YouTube and Twitch. So let me know in the comments if you prefer YouTube or Twitch streams. I've kind of been jumping back and forth, and I don't think this is actually beneficial to me. So I need to pick a platform and stick to it. But yeah, follow me over Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, just because you're cool and you want to do that. And with that said, I'll see you all next time.